Vice Chairman of the National People's Congress, His Excellency Xiao Jie, dear Vice Chairman of the China International Development Cooperation Agency, Zhao Fengtao, our co-host, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and let me say also, dear colleagues, many of you who have traveled from all over the world to join us here at this conference are indeed integral to what you, Vice Chairman, just described, a profession that is integral to an ever-improving public policy arena in which evaluation as a profession, as a practice, has matured to a point where, indeed, when we invite the world to come together, and I want to acknowledge here also the Global Evaluation Initiative, that is a platform that UNDP is very proud to support and belong to, and that through our Independent Evaluation Office, we also take great pride in having played a key role in bringing us together for this conference here in Beijing at a moment in time that you have just described, Vice Chairman, as a turbulent moment, a difficult moment for the world. But I always say, and yet a moment also of extraordinary opportunity. I think as we look at evaluation in the context of development, it is crucial that we also appreciate that very often some of the greatest transformative decisions in development have also had something to do with the practice of evaluation. That closing the loop, I think, as you called it, the learning of the lessons that those who have gone before us have created for us to build on. The practice of evaluation sometimes becomes very much rooted and centered on accountability. And that clearly is a vital part of evaluation. And again, Vice Chairman, you made a very explicit remark about the importance of the autonomy of evaluation. And indeed, I take great pride that in UNDP, we do have an independent evaluation office that in no way mixes up the responsibilities of management and evaluation. And yet, I think we all know and we have all observed that the way in which evaluation becomes most effective is not to view itself as a parallel universe, but to be integral to, whether in the context of national development, the governance and management and policy development and articulation, including through a National People's Congress, a 5-year plan. In an organization like UNDP, through finding the constant dialogue and discourse that allows us not only to be evaluators and evaluees, but indeed to be a virtuous circle of how knowledge experience is translated into more informed, smarter, and wiser management, including with greater clarity on how we define the purpose, the theory of change, and all the planning frameworks that guide us in our work. I want to pay my tribute to all of you who in the field of evaluation, the practice of evaluation, have carried this field forward. We are today in a uniquely challenging position where not only do we need to address a greater complexity of issues simultaneously, systems approaches, overcoming the verticalities and the silos in our government and public institutions, but indeed in many institutional landscapes, is something that we are all struggling with. The challenge of dealing with complexity demands of us that our institutions evolve, that our practice of managing, designing, planning, and implementing also evolve. This applies as much to an organization, be it small, a large organization like UNDP or the World Bank, or indeed China as a society, as an economy, and indeed as a nation. In the way that I hope over the next few days we can reflect on this challenge of how to make evaluation a more effective and even more efficient integral part of this larger whole, I think would be of immense value. We are faced with so many other pressures, a world that is drifting apart, a world that is increasingly finding itself destroying development rather than building development through conflict and wars. We are in a race against time on climate change, where I thought, as you used this very famous Chinese metaphor of crossing the river by feeling the stones, sometimes we feel as if we have run out of time for feeling the stones. We have to run without being able to feel them first. Evaluation could help us to not turn this into a risk of ignorance, or false leads. We are in a race against time, not only on climate change, we are also in an age of possibility. And sometimes it is critical that we as a United Nations, but also as countries that have so much that they can offer to each other, remind ourselves that we live in an age of possibility. The advent of technology in another generation with digital and now artificial intelligence has extraordinary possibilities built into it. We are just beginning to sense them. And again, I think evaluation will play a critical role in allowing us to understand what have been the lessons of previous technological and scientific transformations. How do we use them more wisely? How do we avoid that they become the privilege of the few or the monopolies of some, instead of being a force for inclusion and development in a world that needs to grow together rather than grow apart? Another aspect that I want to briefly touch on that I think over time has become more and more important is that evaluation is not the practice of the few who are enlightened and wise and talk to each other. Be that you as evaluators, be that us as leaders in our organizations in a country, but how do we make evaluation also a vehicle for allowing people to express their view of the value of an intervention, their view of a success, of a policy, or indeed where we have fallen short? I think in part, technology will allow us to broaden that horizon and that radar very quickly to a far greater number of people who can feed into evaluations than where the constraints in the past have often made this into a very selective listening exercise when it came to the broader population that we are all serving. I think the way that, for example, we can address sometimes the silence of so many women in our societies. Gender is still a challenge when it comes to evaluations. Not you as evaluators, but rather how we find formats in which women feel both comfortable and able to contribute. I extend the same to young people. Young people are drivers of development. We all refer to them as such. But how often are they really listened to also in the process of evaluation? They are the ones who will have to listen, to have to live with the lessons of evaluation. And again, I would plead that in our world of evaluation practice and evaluation processes, we find more deliberate and more inclusive ways in which young people can in fact contribute to that. I want to end by just touching one more time on the moment in time in which we find ourselves meeting here in Beijing. Last night at our wonderful dinner that you hosted, Vice Chairman, I alluded to the fact that China is indeed a country in which the practice of development, of learning lessons, of quickly translating them, has almost been in fast-forward mode now for 40 years. The opening up was an extraordinary moment. Everything since then has been an extraordinary set of identifying priorities for national development, testing them, and then taking them to the large-scale transitions and transformations we have seen. That journey has not been without setbacks, and many of our Chinese colleagues in this room will remember that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, one of the great discoveries of this accelerated development process was also a simultaneous amount of pollution and environmental degradation that began to affect the quality of life of every Chinese citizen. But herein lies one of the interesting observations also. China's ability to recognize how the environmental destruction that, in a sense, followed a rapid industrialization, urbanization, was very quickly translated into a series of measures where sometimes other parts of the world took 20, 30 years. Within 5 years, emission standards were introduced. Emission standards were not only introduced, but every single actor, whether consumer or administrator at local government level, were held accountable for implementing it. We have seen, as I mentioned briefly yesterday, remarkable economic transformations. The fact that a nation can lift over 700 million people out of poverty is in itself something that should keep any of us who are working in the field of development continuously studying how China approached this. But it was not only a Chinese miracle, it was also very deliberate, and I have been witness to this for over 20 years now. of China's extraordinary openness to learn from others. So many fora, and including UNDP's own presence that now dates back to 45 years ago when we first established our partnership, has been a companion but also a platform through which China looked at the experiences of other countries, not to simply copy them, but to allow knowledge and evaluation insights to inform its own decision-making. Today we see a nation and a country that has not only cleaned up its rivers and skies, it is indeed a nation that is probably the most advanced when it comes to creating the conditions where a green economy of the 21st century truly will be the driver of technology, innovation, job creation, economic growth, and ultimately our ability to feed 8-9 billion people on this planet, to live in peace with one another while we have access to energy and all the other fundamentals that define development success. I end my presentation by once again thanking all of you for making this journey here, thanking the People's Republic of China and our colleagues in Sitka for the hospitality and the generosity in hosting this conference, and I wish you above all, as delegates, an extraordinarily interesting time of networking, insight, and new friendships. Thank you.
Before of whom have traveled long distances, all united by a common purpose: to use evaluation as a force for meaningful change. Your presence here speaks volumes about our shared commitment to advancing this vital work that has the power to transform decisions and improve lives. To all of you, thank you for being here. It is incredibly inspiring. I want to begin by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to our partners in the government of China, the government of the city of Beijing, and the Chinese International Development Cooperation Agency for their invaluable support in organizing this conference. To His Excellency, Vice Chairman Xiao Jie, Mr. Zhao, Mr. Tian, Mr. Mu, thank you for your warm hospitality today. Xie. My sincere appreciation also goes to our administrator, Mr. Achim Steiner, for being here today despite his and for his insightful remarks. His message reaffirms something I deeply believe. Evaluation is not just a tool, it's an essential pillar of effective governance. And the United Nations Development Program, which has governance as part of its core mandate, has a very important role to play to support countries in strengthening decision-making through evaluative evidence. As I've said before, and I will emphasize again today, we can't make a difference if we work in isolation. We can produce the most insightful evidence, but if we fail to connect it to decision-making processes, we've only fulfilled part of our responsibility. Likewise, if policymakers continue making decisions based on beliefs and untested assumptions, without using evaluations to challenge and validate their choices, they too are missing a crucial opportunity to make real, informed progress. In a world as fragmented as the one in which we live, real change can only happen when we come together. The theme of this conference, responsive evaluation for government, for inclusion, for the future, calls us to embrace the reality of the systems we work in. Responsive evaluations are those that don't just create a direct line between evaluators and decision makers. They open the door to broader, deeper conversations. Responsive evaluations engage not only the leaders and policymakers, but also the implementers, civil society, and above all, the people with the highest stake in the outcomes. These are the communities we serve. people whose present is uncertain and whose future is most at risk. As conflict tears apart the Middle East and many other corners of the world, as we witness the devastating effects of climate change wreaking havoc across countries, as unequal systems deepen our sense of scarcity, driving people to turn against each other, amid all this turmoil, I'd like us to reflect on what can we do to create a more just and equitable world? What needs to happen for evaluations to become an integral part of governance and decision-making, rather a must rather than a nice to have? What is the most effective way to challenge programs and policies that don't align with the values of the Sustainable Development Goals or that fail to deliver the transformative change our world urgently requires? What must change for organizations to promote cultures that are centered around learning? How can we create spaces where we can have honest conversations about what's worked, what hasn't, and where vulnerability is embraced as we navigate a world where nothing is certain? Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves at a critical juncture, a moment of profound crisis, but also one of possibilities, and certainly a moment that calls for responsibility. We can either retreat into silos, or we can rise to the challenge, working together to build the systems and institutions that will lead us toward a more just, sustainable future. This week is a chance to begin that work in earnest. Take full advantage of it. Before I close, I want to express my deep gratitude to my colleagues at the UNDP Independent Evaluation Office, whose tireless efforts behind the scenes are making this conference possible. Thank you. I also want to thank our colleagues at the UNDP Country Office, our close partners at the Global Evaluation Initiative, and our financial sponsors for their unwavering support. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited for the conversations we'll have and the ideas that will emerge. Together, I believe we can turn this shared vision into action. Thank you.
感谢莫希尔主任的致辞。作为全球评估倡议的发起方之一，世界银行独立评估局积极推动评估工作，帮助各国提升治理水平。下面，请世界银行独立评估局财政、私营部门、基础设施和可持续发展部主任诺奈女士致辞。
Dajaja Shaoshan Hao. I think now I will switch to English for the benefit of everybody. Distinguished guests, I would like to begin by expressing my sincere thanks to our partners at the Chinese International Development Cooperation Agency. To Vice Chairman, Mr. Chao Ye, Mr. Tsao, Mr. Tian, Mr. Mu, thank you very much for your warm welcome to your beautiful country. I would also like to thank Administrator Steiner from the United Nations Development Program for our great partnership. On behalf of the World Bank's Group, Independent Evaluation Group, where the Global Evaluation Initiative is housed, it's a pleasure to welcome all of you to this year's National Evaluation Capacities Conference on responsive evaluation for governments, for inclusion, and for the future. As we gather here this week in this extraordinary place, full of culture and history, next to the Great Wall, we find ourselves in a world, in an era of unprecedented uncertainty. We know the multi-poly crises are all over the world, whether it's the pandemic, climate change, food crisis, or conflicts that are affecting different communities. And it's really in these times when evaluation have to be at the core, and we should be helping development. And we play a critical role. We need to identify what it works, what it doesn't work, and how do we rebuild trust in the institutions, in the different communities to ensure accountability. At the Independent Evaluation Group and the GEI, we see three priorities for the evaluation community to focus on. First, the need to harness new data, technology, and methods that will improve the rigor, the quality, and the usefulness of evaluations. By using tools like artificial intelligence or geospatial analysis, we can answer complex questions with greater efficiency, and we can bring more precision, pushing evaluation practices into a new dimension in the future. Second, by collaborating closely with country partners, with different NDBs, we can strengthen local engagement. We can enhance capacity development in the countries, and we can ensure that our evaluations reflect the voices of these most impacted by the decisions. Finally, we must increase our focus on outcomes. We need to go beyond just simple project performance ratings and look at causal contributions and counterfactual analysis to better assess the broader impacts of our interventions. And growing by in the world. It's huge. It's no longer as simple as measuring success by immediate results. What might seem like a positive outcome on the surface can sometimes have unintended consequences negative in the countries. And the challenge we face is to determine whether the results of our interventions are really for the good or actually quite harmful. This is something that requires a deeper understanding of the ripple effects of our work as evaluators, and being mindful of the complexities is critical. Next, evaluations must be systematic. As Administrator Steiner pointed out, in such a complex environment, evaluations cannot be treated as a one-off exercise. They need to be seen in the context of systems, accompanying development initiatives over the long term, and looking at whole bodies of work and long-term interventions. It is essential if we are to understand the full scope of development outcomes and address the interconnected challenges that arise across different sectors over time. And lastly, rigorous evaluations requires innovation, inclusivity, and capacity building. Effective evaluation today and in the future demands rigor underpinned by solid frameworks and methodology. At the same time, evaluations must include voices that are often excluded, particularly those for marginalized communities, so we can ensure fully understanding of the impact of development on the ground. We need to focus on building the capacity of evaluators to produce reliable evidence and use the evidence to make decisions. Key to this, and possibly hardest to achieve is fostering a culture of curiosity and inquiry, one that is open to both success and failure and willing to learn from them. Once again, on behalf of the World Bank Group's Independent Evaluation Group and the GEI, thank you for being here. The conference is truly an opportunity for us to collaborate, to learn, and to innovate in ways that will help us all better manage the challenges the world is facing. Let's make the most of our time together this week as we work towards building stronger, more effective systems for monitoring and evaluation in the world. 谢谢。
感谢诺奈女士的致辞。女士们、先生们，2024年全球国家评估能力会议开幕式到此结束。